Anyway, we've got 20 seconds into it. So I'm going to start us off with a word of prayer. Yeah, I know. Just it's okay. I'll just have to get over me and just not let me be in the way. So let's start off with a word of prayer. We'll jump in. Father God, we thank you so much for this evening. Father, as we take a look at this part of your word, that you would help us to process it, and just help us to get familiar enough to point us in a direction that we can start reading it and start getting connected with you. And I just thank you so much. Father, I just ask your blessing tonight because we've got a lot of information that we're going to try to cover. And just ask that your Holy Spirit would do its job, that you'd help keep me on track with our time, and that your word does not go out from you and return to you void. It always does something in the process. And so tonight I just ask that you would touch our hearts, draw us close to you. Thank you for your Son, Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. Last week, we covered 5,500 years. Today, we have 22 books of the Bible that we're going to cover. At 2.5 minutes each, that gets us 54 minutes. 55 minutes of time. So we have 58 minutes left. So like I said, yeah, if you got a pen that it gets stuck, I'm sorry. Just throw it down and get you a new one, or just kind of skip it and go on, or wait till the video comes out on YouTube in about 2 weeks and kind of get caught up. Other than that, we're just going to start with our big verses again. We got Genesis 1:1. Say it with me. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 15:6. Abram believed the Lord. Say this with me. And he credited to him as righteousness. Okay, let's try this again. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness. Tonight, the little verse we're going to take a look at, hopefully for about 4 minutes. Whew, here we go. Habakkuk 2:4. I'll read the first part, read the bottom part with me. See, he is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by his faith. We got John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. We have Hebrews 11:6, and I know this is small print, and if you got your book, you want to read it on the back of your book with me, we can. Here we go. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Then we have Revelation 21:1-3. I'll read the first part, read the bottom, or say the bottom part with me. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And I heard a loud voice, say this part with me, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. All right, so we've got our big verses done and kind of read through there, and we've been talking a little bit. This is kind of our foundation of what we're doing. If you haven't noticed, what we're talking about on Monday night is coming up on Sunday. So kind of get a big broad shotgun here, and then on Sunday mornings we're kind of lasering in on just a few key thoughts. So hopefully some of it will overlap, but not a whole lot. But anyway, what we're doing tonight is we are doing these light brown colors: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And then the green colors here, which are the prophets. So we're on class session number 3 in the book. We are in the writings. The writings are very simply a group of 5 books that they didn't really know what else to call them. And so they called them writings because apparently they were written down. So this is just kind of the Jewish mindset. We're going to start off here with Job. And the reason I want to start off with Job is that, as you notice, We have Genesis actually getting covered down there. But where Genesis was written, Genesis wasn't written until about the 1400 BC era with Moses. When Moses came on the scene, Job was an old story. Okay? Best way to explain it. Job was an old story when Moses showed up. You've heard this little nursery rhyme, ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, we all fall down. You've heard that, right?
Right.
That actually is a rhyme about the Black Plague. Pretty perverse when you think it's a children's rhyme. But the distance between us and the Black Plague is about the same as Moses to Job. And so we know that the Black Plague happened. We know that it was a really bad deal. But it's not something that comes up in everyday conversation. The same would be the very same thing as that, this was an old story when Moses heard it. It's possible that Moses wrote Job. I'm not going to sit and argue the pros and cons of that because that's really not what we're taking a look at. But here's what happens in Job. Job is a book that basically asks, why do bad things happen? Job was a wealthy guy. In one afternoon, he lost his kids, he lost his house, he lost his crops, he lost everything. And anyway, it's like, holy cow. Satan said, I bet you, God, that I can get him to curse you. And if you remember the old Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, the old movie, I see that movie as kind of a modern day experience with Job, because we really do have, in my concept, the two guys in the bathroom making a bet. We have God and Satan making a bet. Saying, you know what, if you take everything away from Job, he'll end up living on the streets. Okay? And the whole thing is that in his whole experience with Job, it's just a test. And the thing is, Job comes out and he says, God, why do bad things happen? And God never answers him. A couple things about Job is he has 4 friends that show up, 3 of them that we get quite a few things from. Eliphaz is one of them. Zophar is the other one. The shortest guy in the Bible's mentioned in Job. Now, you're probably thinking that the shortest guy is actually in the New Testament was Zacchaeus, because he was a wee little man. Bildad in the book of Job was actually the shortest guy. You're already laughing because his name is Bildad the Shuhite. So think about that. Okay. He's the Shuhite. So not really the okay. We're playing with that. We're playing with that. In the book of Job, God spends the last couple chapters saying, where were you when I created the world? Where were you when I was doing all this? And where were you when... And basically God says, it's really not about you, Job. Don't worry about it. Just keep on going. And at the end, everything that Job had lost is restored. We're going to jump into the book of Psalms. Psalms has 150 chapters. It's the longest book that we have in the Old Testament and the New Testament combined. It's actually 5 different books in one. This is fairly interesting. If you want, I'm going to throw some information out at you. Again, if you want to write this down, if you want to get it later, you can. Here's how the divisions go. Book 1 is chapters 1 through 41, or Psalms 1 through 41. One author I was reading says it really has a correlation between Genesis and what the plan of God is for man. Thought that was kind of interesting. Chapters 42 through 72, so the next 30 books, or 30 Psalms there, parallels the book of Exodus and that a Redeemer is coming. Again, I just thought this was interesting. Chapters 33 through 89 parallels Leviticus, where we have God dwelling between the seraphim and his covenant with that. Psalms 90 through 106 is very much the idea of numbers and what God does for us while we are in the wilderness. And then from Psalm 107 to 150 is a restoring of the covenant and kind of parallels Deuteronomy. So this one particular author was taking Psalms and the 5 books of Psalms and comparing them to the 5 books of the Torah. Those are big, broad brushstrokes. I think that there's something to that. One thing about the book of Psalms is that as you read through it, you're going to find Psalms that don't touch your heart today, but 10 years ago they did, and 10 years from now they might. It's very much a collection of songs that when you find the one that's dealing with where you're at in life, it's there. And your heart is instantly just drawn, and it just really kind of sucks you in. I want to throw this out because this is one of those crazy train ideas about the book of Psalms. And that is, there's a tradition that's starting in the year of 1900 that each psalm has something to do with that particular year. And so as we get into 2014, if you looked up Psalm 114, then it's weird and crazy, and there's some things that kind of make sense. There's some kind of things that's like, what the heck does this mean? Just wanted to let you know there's that whole idea that's floating around. I don't know how valuable it is, but it's enough to say, oh, that's weird, huh? Okay, here's Proverbs. Proverbs is 31 chapters. One of the things that I had taught to me from a business friend of mine, he was an insurance agent, about the book of Proverbs. He said, on every day of the month, I will read that chapter of Proverbs until I get to the last one, in which case I maybe have 2 or 3 to read. So that, it's kind of, you can do that. If you think about today's what is the day even? The 9th, okay. 10th, I don't know what day it is. I just show up and do my thing. So, if today's the 9th, then read Proverbs 9. If tomorrow's the 10th, read Proverbs 10. And you'll go through the book of Proverbs 12 times in a year. It was one of the things that he built his business on. He built it on just one of those habits. That was the first thing that he would do when he got into the office, is he'd crack open his Bible and read that chapter of Proverbs for the day. Here's who they were written by. They were actually written by 3 guys. Solomon has written the most of them. We get another guy whose name is Agur, the son of Jacob, and then the last one is King Lemuel. One of the things about the book of Proverbs is that in Proverbs chapter 31, King Lemuel writes about a woman of noble character. I'm going to jump on this crazy train for just a second because I'm really wrestling through this. And it's one of these little ideas that's like, I wonder if. Remember when we were taking a look at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Isaac, we don't hear from him until he takes his wife. We have Jesus, who in the book of Revelation is coming back to take his bride. It's interesting if you read Proverbs 31, and instead of looking for a wife or a woman of noble character, if you read that with the context of the church, gives us a really good idea of what the church should be. So that's just an interesting little, I just kind of throw that out there. That's Proverbs 31. Ecclesiastes, made famous by the birds. For everything, turn, turn, turn. It's like you can just add turn, turn, turn to any part of the Bible and you get this whole really cool 60, 70 song. So what they did is that they kind of brought that one passage to light, still a little bit in our culture. Ecclesiastes is basically the question, what is the meaning of life? Why is it that we exist? What in the world are we here to do? Solomon, and we were taking a look at him, Solomon is this guy who, he started out with it all and had wisdom and had money, and he could experience anything that he wanted to experience. And at the end of the day, he says, sitting on the top of the world, it's meaningless and worthless and chasing after the wind. there's really no substance to anything that we can do or accomplish, because when we die, we're going to leave it to somebody else. And so what it comes down to, and this is in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13, he says, at the end, when I really tried to put all this together, here's what life is really about. Fear God and keep His commandments. Fear God and keep His commandments. One of the things about Ecclesiastes that I love is that if you're really wrestling with whether it's, does my life mean something? Is what I'm doing really important? Read Ecclesiastes and make sure that all your guns are locked up. Okay. It can be a rather depressing experience, but at the end of it, it's one of these things, you know what? Don't get so worked up about things that we get worked up about. It really doesn't matter. One of the things I'd like to summarize with the book of Ecclesiastes is this little phrase a good friend of mine taught to me a long time ago, is that in 20 years, what does it matter? In 20 years, what does it matter? Now, if it's going to matter 20 years from now, yeah, what you're doing is probably pretty important. But if what you're doing really doesn't matter in 20 years, don't get too excited about it, because things change. That's really, that's really in a nutshell summary of Ecclesiastes. The last one here that we're going to take a look at as far as the writings, because it's the last one left, is called Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon, in our Americanism, in our American churchianity, that's where we don't go. It's a bad book you shouldn't even read that in the Bible. How it even got in the Bible is beyond us, because in the old words from the Music Man, it's a dirty book. So here's some things about the Song of Solomon. In the Song of Solomon, you have this, for lack of a better term, this love play, or this cheesy romance, or it's not quite Nicholas Sparks, but by golly, it's awfully close. You have the male hero. You have the woman that he is attracted to, courting to, marry, wants to get there. And then you have her friends talking back and forth between the two. I mean, it's like right out of junior high. And the bad thing about the Song of Songs is that if you read it and you think, oh, it couldn't really be talking about that because that's really strange. It is. It's really talking about that. And yes, it's like, oh.
There's a pastor that's written a book about it.
Yeah.
No,
It's really good.
Yeah, and he had a memory.
No, you're exactly right. And it's one of these things about the Song of Songs that it doesn't get the attention in our American society that it really deserves.
I would have got Dallas-Fort Worth singles attention.
Yeah.
I mean, well.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well,
I know exactly what you're talking
that
about.
has singles going
Yeah.
to it. It's like, taught on this.
Yeah.
And the crowds got, I mean, it
Yeah.
was thousands,
Yeah.
I mean, I think 10,000 maybe, or 5 to 7.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
it
a,
got attention.
yeah. But anyway, Song of Solomon, you read it and it's like, oh, still, if you think that's what it's saying, it's probably saying that. So that's the writings: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. Most of them happened, the Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, happened over the lifespan of David and his son, Solomon. As David was experiencing getting chased by Saul in his whole time, that's when these things were being written. Some of these psalms that David writes are, you can almost chart David's life through the psalms and see, wow, he's really wrestling with life. And just a normal guy with normal problems. Some that he created for himself. But they're there, and how God deals with his heart. Psalms, I think, is probably the best description of, if David is a man after God's own heart, then God is a God after the heart of man. And so that's really in the Psalms. These next things that we're going to take a look at here are the prophets. Some of these I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but other than just to give you a real brief, maybe 2 or 3 word synopsis of what's going on with them. The prophets are divided into two different groups. We have our major prophets and our minor prophets. Now, the other thing that happens in our American mindset is when you hear majors and minors and you think about baseball season, is you think that, okay, the major prophets, they're the big paid guys and they've got a lot, they're up there. And the minor prophets, well, they're kind of like the minor league guys, and that's really not the case. The reason for the major and minor differentiation is that the major prophets just simply wrote more. There's just more volume to what they wrote. Whereas the minor prophets are kind of these guys that get a laser pointer and a PowerPoint, and they're going to do it in 20 minutes. Where Isaiah spends his entire life doing this, some of these other guys, it's just, blink, it's just one episode in their life where God showed up, like especially in the book of Jonah. God showed up, he said, Jonah, go there. No, go there. No, go there. No, go there. I'm getting on a boat. No. Overboard you go. And it's just a short amount of time that Jonah's life is written in the book of Jonah. And he goes and basically his entire ministry is not very long in the city of Nineveh. And then it's over. And then God shows him through that with the idea of, oh, remember this little plant? We'll talk about that here in just a second. So here we go. Here's our major prophets, minor prophets. First one we're going to take a look at is Isaiah. Isaiah is, you could spend a lifetime, I believe, in Isaiah and never dig out everything that's there. One of the things that we do get from Isaiah, especially from Isaiah chapter 53, is we get a lot of prophecy about Jesus from the book of Isaiah. When you and I think of prophecy, I sometimes think that we take a look at prophecy and we say, oh, you're going to foretell the future. That's our American mindset of prophecy. The Jewish mindset of prophecy is the idea of pattern, okay? Here's how this happened here. Here's how it's happening. And this pattern is going to be repeated sometime in the future. And so with all of these prophets, you see this whole idea of pattern. So when Isaiah comes and he writes the things that he writes about Jesus Christ, it seems, even reading it today, that that's kind of rather figurative. But it also literally happened in the life of Jesus. For example, let's, if you got a Bible close by, we're just going to jump into Isaiah 53 here. Because when we can see this, because you have to understand, Isaiah to the people of that time is as bizarre as Revelation is to you and I.
Isaiah what?
Isaiah 53, okay? Isaiah 53. As weird as, when we're getting ready to take a look at Revelation here in a couple weeks, there's going to be some strange things in Revelation that we walk away saying, oh, Larry's crazy or God's crazy or they're both crazy, okay? Because there's some crazy things in Revelation. And as strange as Revelation is to us, understand that it was just as strange to them. And so, when we see here, like in verse 2 of Isaiah 53, he grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. Now that doesn't sound like, that's kind of bizarre. Did Jesus really grow up like a root out of dry ground? Well, when you understand some other things from the Bible about the root of Jesse, David, and that he's the kingdom of David, yes, the imagery follows. Think about this. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Strange. Jesus was a normal looking guy. He didn't have something that said, oh my goodness, we need to get him on TV. He's just a normal looking guy. He says he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. Now, while that's, we can draw some conclusions about Jesus' life, we can also draw some conclusions. He understood what suffering was. I mean, if you imagine a young Jewish boy growing up with, hey, mom's fooling around with dad before they got married, and, dad didn't have her stoned. Well, it must be, dad's. And it's like Jesus went to school every day, with being whispered about. And saw mom whispered about, things like that. Let's just take a look at verse 4. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. Because he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Now, figuratively, yes, that happened, but also, literally, those things happened as well. And so one of the things I want you to consider is when you're dealing with prophecy, is, especially in the case of Jesus, yes, they were figuratively interpreted back then, but they were also literally happened. Okay? So the question to my mind is, when we get ready to start taking a look at Revelation here in just a couple of sessions, is what happens is, are those things in Revelation literal as well? My gut tells me you will be able to say, oh, this is where that event happened when the time of Revelation comes. When those things are happening, it's like, oh, yeah, oh, that really happened. Oh, that really makes sense. Oh, I finally get what God was doing. Okay? And so this is one of these strange things that Isaiah starts getting us prepped for. There's so much more to Isaiah, and I hate to just leave it with that, but we're going to have to because we're going on to Jeremiah. Yeah, I'm a couple minutes behind, but we're close. Here we go. Jeremiah. Again, sent to the southern kingdom. God said, Jeremiah, I'm going to send you to the southern kingdom, and I want you to tell them everything that I tell you. And you can almost hear Jeremiah's words in the first chapter not being expressed, but God, you're nuts. Because they will beat me up and they will kill me and they will throw me in a well and they will do this and they will do that, and this is not a popular message. And in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 8, he says, Jeremiah, I am with you and I will rescue you. Okay, I am with you and I will rescue you. And one of the things for Jeremiah is that Jeremiah went out and if God said it, Jeremiah said it. And Jeremiah wasn't a popular guy. If you can imagine the Rush Limbaugh way back then, okay? Conservatives loved him, liberals hated him. Nobody really wanted to be around him, and he got beat up all the time by anybody who knew him. That's kind of the whole idea there behind Jeremiah. And in this process of Jeremiah, he keeps saying, hey, I hate to tell you this, God's not messing around, and God's getting ready to do this quickly. What happens, and most people will say that Jeremiah, and I have Jeremiah and Lamentations on the same card. I see Lamentations as like Jeremiah part 2, except Lamentations has this whole different flavor of it. Lamentations is first of all, it's a lament. It's a crying of bad things happening. It is when Jerusalem falls. You can see Jeremiah with tears in his eyes saying, oh my goodness, how bad is this? We've probably all seen this little bitty clip. It goes back, several years to where this big airship, the Hindenburg, flew from Germany to New York. And just as it's getting ready to land, there's a major malfunction. Yeah. And you hear the reporter there saying what? Oh, the humanity. Oh, the humanity. If you can put yourself in that spot, that's lamentation. As Jerusalem is falling, it's, oh, the humanity. And here it is. If you're in a bad mood or you deal with serious depression, probably stay out of Lamentations. Okay? Because it's one of these books that as you read it, and it's just a couple chapters long, but when you understand it in its context, it's like, oh, wow, this is bad things happening. And so this is part of Jeremiah. Next one we're going to go on to then is Ezekiel. If it's weird, and if it's talked about in the sci-fi community, it probably came out of Ezekiel. Okay? If you're flipping through the channels, of the TV, if the Bible was a TV, where Exodus might be, CNN or Headline, Fox News, whatever else you want to put here, Ezekiel is the sci-fi channel of the Bible. I don't know how else to best to describe it. And it's interesting that even in the sci-fi channel, they start alluding to weird things out of Daniel and Ezekiel. So it's kind of like, oh, yeah, that's kind of strange. But Ezekiel is these visions of God that Ezekiel has that apparently nobody else has. I'm reading an old book by a Jewish historian. I'm in my second year of going through this book. I'm on like page 1300 of 2100, so it's taken me a while to go through it. But in this idea of prophecy and this idea of Ezekiel, he has an interesting thing that he makes a statement of, and that is when you see these guys and they see images of a pot, and then maybe there's this strange image of something completely unrelated. He said normally they have the same letters in the Hebrew language, except the letters are reversed, showing us that God is changing his opinion about whatever's happening. So I'm still wrestling through with that. I still can't quite get to where I can say, man, I really understand what this guy's talking about. But Ezekiel starts falling into this kind of category where we see these strange, we see wheels within a wheel. We see these strange creatures, man, right off the bat, and here's this strangeness, and it's like, oh, the people out in Roswell say, oh man, this is our book right here, because you can see, UFOs are in the Bible, because Ezekiel didn't know what they are either. One of the things about Ezekiel is that he keeps prepping them. Hey, I know that you rejected God. I know that you're rebelling against God. And God's not going to let that slide. Is essentially the message of Ezekiel. Yeah, you're in rebellion. Yeah, you're rejecting God. And I hate to break it to you, but God's not going to let it slide. He also tells Ezekiel numerous times in the first couple chapters, just like Jeremiah, don't be afraid. If I'm showing this to you, don't be afraid to say it. And so, put yourself in Ezekiel's shoes. You wake up and it's like, well, that's some strange stuff going on. And God says, write it down. If I write this down, they'll send me away to the nut house. Okay? I'll be the crazy uncle that nobody wants to talk about at Thanksgiving. So that's Ezekiel. Daniel's another guy. If Ezekiel is the, holy cow, this guy's crazy. Daniel is completely crazy, but he has every bit of credibility in the world. Here's Daniel that shows up. He is a captive when Jerusalem fell. He's a young, I get this image of Daniel as this young Ivy League guy. Clean cut, good looking kid. Man, he's got the whole world in front of him, and man, off he's taken into captivity. And the first thing he does is he negotiates with his captors to say, I want to keep my religion. Yeah, we can't do that. Oh, I'm going to keep my religion. Yeah, we can't do that. I mean, the king will have my head on a plate if I do this. He said, I'll tell you what, just give me fruits and vegetables for a couple weeks. And if I don't look better, then that's fine. We'll eat your food. So that I need to stay, lack of a better term, kosher. Okay? And so the guy does it, says, oh, we'll try it. It's worth an experiment. Worst thing that can happen is he kills you and me, and then we're off to the races. And at the end of that, the guy in charge says, "You are better. Well, you're better off than the other guys. So we're going to start eating your food." And so Daniel starts early on with negotiation, and in this whole process with Nebuchadnezzar's court, he keeps getting promoted. He keeps getting promoted, and he ends up basically, the White House chief of staff. He's the guy who's large and in charge. But if you really want, the person who's going to go on the television and get in trouble for it is Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel's the one who's really doing a lot of these things. We get this, Nebuchadnezzar has these dreams, and the interesting thing about Daniel is that he and Joseph are the guy who deals predominantly with dreams and their interpretation. So I want to say that when you understand Joseph out of the book of Genesis, and you understand Daniel and how they saw dreams, it gives us some insight into what God does, especially in how he talks to us, for lack of a better term, extra-biblically. Okay? There are times that we have things in our life happen that we can't explain how we got there. But by golly, we know it's a God thing. Okay? So one of the things about Daniel is, in Daniel the last couple of chapters of Daniel, he actually starts pointing to, if he did know it, I can't prove it, but he starts pointing us into the book of Revelation, because we're going to see a lot of the same imagery from Revelation that we see in the last couple chapters of Daniel. Daniel also pretty much nails the date in which Jesus Christ walks into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. Okay? He nails the date. And so you can actually go through mathematically, figure this out. The interesting thing is that we think of our years as 365 days. There's a guy before the Civil War that did a really neat book. I can get you a copy of it off the internet if you'd like. Makes the case that prophetic years are 360 days. And when you take that and you apply the math from what when Daniel says, from the abomination of desolation to the time that the Messiah is here, it gets to the date of 1 week before the crucifixion. Strange things. Daniel has some accuracy to it. Now, you're going to have to go out and explore that on your own sometime, and don't just take it that that's what Larry said. I've read it because that's somebody else told me, and I don't believe them, so I expect you not to believe me too. Okay? But I can point you in those directions. Let you discover for yourself. Okay. We have 20 minutes for page 2. If a tornado hits us right now, we're good. Okay? This is where we're going to go bang, 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 bang. If you have a question, raise your hand, stop me. Jonah. We talked about Jonah a little bit earlier. At the end of Jonah, in this brief span of time where he went to Nineveh, he gets done preaching to Nineveh, and he goes up and he sits down on a hill outside of town. And he says, "Okay, God, I'm ready. I did my job. Blow them up. I want to see this. This is going to be cool." And God doesn't do it. Instead, God gives him a plant that in one day grows up and gives him shade. The next day, a worm comes and eats it, and it dies, and Jonah's hacked off because God took his little tree away. And the whole point of Jonah isn't about the whale, it isn't about Nineveh, or it isn't about anything else other than this. God asked Jonah, "Were you mad when the tree died?" "Yeah, I was mad. I'm so mad I could die. I'm mad." God said, "That's how I feel about Nineveh." Point of Jonah. That's how I feel about Nineveh. Nobody's too small. Sometimes we get things all out of whack. That's really what Jonah's about. Amos. Wow. You can go off the crazy train with Amos. I'm going to point us just for a second. Amos starts off, says about 2 years before this earthquake in the year of King Uzziah, or the commotion that happened with King Uzziah. It's 2 years before this happened. So, whether or not he writes, it's 2 years before the earthquake, Or somebody came back and said, oh, we found this from Amos, it was 2 years before the earthquake when he wrote this. You can wrestle with that all you want to. But here's basically here's what the point of Amos is. Seek the Lord and live. I mean, a lot of bad things coming up, but you got to seek God, because if you don't seek God, I hate to break it to you, but you're going to die. Okay, so the whole point really is seek the Lord and live, because a day is coming when God's not going to put up with it anymore. That's from chapter 5, verse 6 of the book of Amos, and that's all we're going to talk about that. Hosea is, gosh, if you don't have the life of Hosea, go home tonight and say thank you. Okay, because here is a guy, a preacher, that God said, oh, by the way, I want you to go out and marry a prostitute. And he said, but I want to marry a prostitute. I said, I don't care. You're going to go marry a prostitute and make it worse. Her name's going to be Gomer. And she said, golly. I can't really do Gomer well, but anyway. Now, put yourself married to a prostitute frame of mind. He has 2 kids, well, 3 kids. First known, his name is Jezreel, because he said there's going to be a big battle at Jezreel. He has 2 more kids. This is what he names them in the English. Is the first one is, you're not loved. Love on me, you're not loved. It's not quite I hate you, but it's, oh, you're not loved. So, okay, Dad, why do I get this pretty name? Oh, if you think that's bad, here's the other one. You're not mine. You're not mine. Now that's, you know, you're fine. You'll just wait for just a second. So if you can imagine meeting a guy at the grocery store whose wife's not around, he's got 3 little kids. I said, oh, tell me the name of your kids. Oh, this one's name is Iraq, Afghanistan. You know, because there's conflict that's always going on. Pretty indicative of how the house works. He said, this is my other child, not loved. Man, that just, ugh, wow. And this is my other one, not mine. You're like, oh, Hosea, man, that's a bad thing. And what Hosea and God do through his life and his everyday experience, he actually goes to his prostitute wife who's sleeping around for money with another guy. And he goes to the other guy and he says, I'll tell you what, I want to buy her back. And I will pay you for her. Okay, so he goes to another guy who's his wife's pimp and pays the pimp for his wife to move in with him. Now, if that doesn't sound a little bizarre, that's how God is seeing the northern kingdom. Okay? They get this one shot, they get this one story. You're not loved, you're not mine. You're out there doing all these things, you're walking away from me, and I'm going to pay for you anyway. And when you think about this, what God is doing is he's paying for an unfaithful wife. And God, through the life of Jesus Christ, pays for Israel, an unfaithful wife, and he pays for their sins that way. And that's what Hosea is really all about, just kind of in a nutshell. We get Obadiah. Obadiah is the smallest book in the Old Testament. Obadiah is, man, that long. And basically it's a hate letter to Esau. It's called Edom. But if you go back to Jacob and Esau, when Jacob, who's the northern kingdom, was captured, Esau, the brother, was really nothing, didn't really do anything to stop it. And Obadiah is nothing but an indictment against Esau for not standing up for God's people and not standing up for your own brother. Okay, so man, you're related, you didn't even do anything. Oh, we just thought it was going to get better. Anyway, that's Obadiah. Joel. If I were to tell you tonight to read one of these minor prophets before you go to bed, it would be the book of Joel. Joel's really neat in the fact that what happens is that Joel talks about a swarm of locusts that's coming to eat everything up. Okay? So here it is, man. Everything that you got is going to be taken away. But what I want you to do is that I want you to turn to God. I want you to get right with God. And then what happens then is that God comes back and moves in, and He's going to restore everything that you have lost. And at the end of chapter 1, first part of chapter 2 of the book of Joel, he just very simply says, man, you got to tear your heart for God. Actually rend your heart. I mean, just get your heart broken for God. And when you do that, when you start taking care of the heart, the rest of all the bad things that you see will start kind of get right. And that's just the Joel in a nutshell. If you, like I said, if you had one, if I was going to say, read one before you go to bed tonight, it'd be the book of Joel. It takes you a couple minutes to do that. We have a guy by the name of Micah who shows up. The gist about the book of Micah is that God has His plans and you have your plans, and God's going to trump your plans. Okay, that's Micah. He said, and oh, by the way, there's going to be this guy who's going to come out of Bethlehem. You really probably ought to pay attention to him because he's going to fix a lot of stuff. Think about a carpenter. It's kind of this whole idea just kind of starts pointing towards Jesus. And it's in Micah that we say there's a ruler coming from Bethlehem. And so in the New Testament, as we get ready to take a look at Jesus next week, when they said, where in the world is this King of the Jews supposed to be born? And they went and they dug it up. More than likely, they found it also in Micah saying, oh, he's supposed to come out of Bethlehem. And that's why Herod sends his troops off to Bethlehem, is because of Micah. Some 600 years before it happens. 700 years before it happens. Nahum shows back up. Nahum comes back here again. Nahum is I don't know how to say this. It's important that it's there, but it doesn't deal with the Jews. It deals with Assyria and Nineveh, and basically it is, yes, you did God's will when you went in and, captured Jerusalem and all that, but God's going to punish you anyway, because you were bad to begin with, and I hate to break it to you, God's going to deal with it. So yes, they accomplished what God's will was for the kingdom, for them to be totally annihilated, and then God says, oh, I hate to break it to you, but thanks for doing that for me, but I'm going to annihilate you anyway. So, good luck with that. It's kind of Nahum in a weird little sense. Habakkuk. This is where a little verse comes from. Habakkuk, have you ever gotten mad at God and I thought that it was okay? Habakkuk is flat out mad at God. Okay? It's like, God, you shouldn't be doing the things that you're doing. And he says, basically, God, I don't like what you're doing here. It's wrong that you're doing this. Explain yourself. And God explains himself. In this context, in the last book, in Habakkuk chapter 1, if you got your Bible, get it close by, let's just hop over there real quick so we put this verse in context. Yeah, man. I know it's in there. Might take some looking.
There it is.
There we go. He gets his first complaint, off to God. He says, God, I call for help, but you don't listen. That's chapter 1. God says, yeah, well, deal with it. In such a certain way. Here it is. The complaint that he has, and this is almost like putting God on trial, if you think about a complaint and a lawyer. Verse 13 of Habakkuk chapter 1 says, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Statement about God. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those who are more righteous than themselves? Valid complaint. God, I mean, you can't tolerate bad people, but when they're doing their stuff, you don't stop them either. Okay? And then the answer, this is what God answers it with verse 2. It says, write down the revelation. When we were talking, from Sunday about now a righteousness apart from the law has been revealed. We see Paul making a big deal of this revelation. He says, write down the revelation, make it plain on the tablet so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end. So here's Habakkuk. Like, man, there's something really important coming up. We're supposed to put this on the headline news, and everybody can take this, take it with them. We've got to send this all over the place. Here it is. See, he's puffed up. His desires are not upright. Talking about the wicked. Talking about the evil. Talking about the people who just, man, they're just out there doing everything wrong. And yeah, God says, see, just look at them. They are all puffed up, and their desires are not upright. But here's the secret. Here's the revelation. Make sure you make a note of this. The righteous live by his faith. And I wonder if Habakkuk kind of walked away from this like, man, God, I really don't get this. I really don't get your answer to this. If your answer to evil is that the righteous will live by faith, there's a lot. I mean, that's the New Testament theology that was written, roughly 600 years before Jesus showed up. Habakkuk 2:4 is so important. It's the foundation of the book of Romans. It's the foundation of the book of Galatians. It's alluded to as one of the foundations in the book of Hebrews. And Romans defines righteousness. Galatians shows us how we will live or how we live. And then Hebrews, in faith, take a look at our righteousness and where our righteousness really comes from. And so, it's really strange, but this really is the foundation of New Testament theology shown up in Habakkuk 2:4. So, some of that we'll talk a little bit more on Sunday, but enough to get us pointed in the right direction. Hey, we're not doing too bad. 7 minutes, 4 books left. Zephaniah. Zephaniah talks about there's a day of the Lord that's coming. In chapter 2, verse 3, God says, there's a shelter here. I'm going to shelter. I know it's going to be bad, but there is a shelter here. And once this day comes, once the day of the Lord comes, you're going to be restored. And there's a promise that, hey, there's a way to get out of it, and there's a way for everything that's lost to be restored. That's Zephaniah in a nutshell. Haggai. Haggai is just basically, he just pretty much talks to this guy named Zerubbabel, who is one of the guys in charge. He says, Zerubbabel, you got to do this, and Zerubbabel goes and does it. Zerubbabel, you got to do this, and Zerubbabel goes and does it. One of the things about Zerubbabel is that he was the one that was chosen by God to do the restoring. And so there's some pictures here between Zerubbabel that we see as he's restoring worship back to a kingdom that has come out of captivity, who has walked away from God, and he's trying to get them back on the right path. There are some of those same images that we can correlate them with Jesus about how he brings us back. And he's the one who's chosen by God. The book of Zechariah, and this is after the exile, so they've come back, they're back in the land. Haggai is a part of that. Zechariah is a part of it. Zechariah is probably my favorite of the minor prophets. And he's really close to being my favorite out of all the prophets. It's just some strange things that happen in Zechariah. Zechariah's big message is return to God. Hey, you guys have gone off and done your own thing. You've experienced the good times, the bad times, and now you've come back. The temple's getting rebuilt. Zechariah says, man, now that the temple's rebuilt, just get back. Just get back right with God. Just walk away from the old way of doing things and return to God. He says, if you return to God, God will return to you. And that's the message of Zechariah. If you've ever felt like in your point in space in your life where God's just being really quiet and you're not sure if you've done something to shut that off, and you really don't have very many answers, it's just like, God, you're just not doing a whole lot of things right now in my life. what am I supposed to be doing? Zechariah says, return to God and God will return to you. It's called the dark night of the soul by other writers, in where just in life you go through times where, man, it's been really hard, and you know that God is sitting there walking you through each and every day, and you see God moving time and time and time and time again. And then you come out of that and you expect that same closeness in the middle of the struggle to be there every day. But God's like saying, you know, I got you through the struggle. You're good. Just go and do. There's a lot of that in Zechariah. Just, hey, you know, return to God. Keep the basics basic. You know, keep doing what you're doing. God's going to come back, and He'll do that. And so it really does, for me, just kind of part of the spiritual ebb and flow. The last one we're going to take a look at is the Italian prophet Malachi. Oh, come on now, that was semi-funny. Malachi. You remember Malachi brothers from Happy Days. Anyway. Roger's getting it. That's okay. It's Malachi. Anyway, just one of those fun things that I learned a long time ago. Referred to him as the Italian prophet Malachi. Malachi comes on, and this is 400 or so years before Jesus' time. He's the last words we get of the Old Testament. And, you know, famous last words are pretty important. So this really is how the Old Testament closes. Some famous last words that I like is, I wouldn't worry about it. They couldn't hit an elephant from that distance. There was a colonel way back when who was looking over the wall and said that to one of his friends. Famous last words.
Yeah.
They couldn't hit an elephant at that distance. Well, apparently they did. So famous last words can kind of be important. Yeah. Anyway, what Malachi does is he comes in and he gives a call to restore the rightful worship of God. So in this thing is that, you know, the Jewish people, they've gone through the kings, they've seen the kingdom split, they saw it, you know, 10 tribes get completely annihilated, the other 2 end up in Babylon for 70 years, they've come back, they've got the temple rebuilt, they've got Jerusalem rebuilt, they're still getting some encouragement from God, and here's Malachi who shows up and says, you know what, we've got all the stuff that we need, let's do right worship. But the big thing about Malachi is it's not just doing it because we know how to do it. It's doing it because our heart is right. And Malachi, time and time and time again, comes back to, yes, we're doing it, but we're really not doing it. There was a question that Malachi asks. He said, would a man rob God? And the answer would be, no. How in the world would a man rob God? He said, well, you rob God because you're not bringing in the whole tithe into the storehouse. And in Malachi, a challenge is given by God. God says, I'll tell you what, you bring the whole tithe into the storehouse and you test me in this. God gives permission to test him. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse and see if I won't open up the floodgates and see what happens. Now, there's a challenge that God gives about getting our hearts right, not just our actions right. So that's the prophets. One last thing I want to leave you with, going back to the book of Daniel. Something I wanted to touch on that I want to make sure I had time on. So I got 1 minute to touch on it. Daniel, way back here over in Babylon, never comes. We don't hear that Daniel ever comes back out of Babylon. Apparently he retires there, stays. What is suggested, not only in Daniel but from some other Jewish traditions, is that he started a Bible college. He started a Hebrew rabbi school over there in Babylon, which is modern-day Iran and Iraq. And so what happens is we get this 2 schools. One is the group who's come back to Jerusalem, and the other one is Daniel. Daniel's kind of the one who is like, oh, yeah, well, we got a school over there, but we really don't talk about it. It'd be kind of like OU and OSU, and like, well, yeah, there is another school in Oklahoma, but depending on which one you go to, we just don't talk about it. Okay? So kind of that whole flavor. What happens is that some guys from the school of Daniel start reading Daniel and start calculating. It's like, hey, you know what? Somebody important's coming. And when we read in the book of, when we read in the Gospels about these wise men who came from the east, more than likely came from the school that Daniel started. Okay, they were the ones who had it figured out. We went through the Old Testament. We know that Jesus is showing up soon. We think it's probably this week.
It's Bethlehem.
Yeah, we think it's probably Bethlehem, but we want to get permission, Herod, to go down there. Except we don't want to tell you everything. And so it's really interesting when for me anyway, you can start kind of following the political intrigue and the separations, and it's like, oh, okay, that's how that works. So just because Daniel's left over in Babylon doesn't mean that God's work over there stops. It just doesn't get caught up until we see the wise men show up. So that's kind of the prophets and the writings there in a nutshell. And I want to say this. I know I've thrown a lot at you in 2 hours from last session and this one about the Old Testament. Go home and breathe, because this was the easy part. So let me pray for us. Let me pray for us. If you have questions you're going to talk about after this weekend, let's pray.